Hello there, this is a new books video, and unfortunately I've come to realize that recently I was asked to do a books video all concerning books that I didn't like. And when I saw that, I think it was a question on Formspring. When I saw that question I thought, I'm never going to do it because I don't like it when I don't like a book. I like to stretch my judgment to find something good in a book that I didn't enjoy, because otherwise it's my fault. But this time I have to start with a few books that I definitely didn't like. The first one, you'll be surprised to know, it's a David Nicholls book. It's called The Understudy. It came out in 2005, and it's the story of one Steve McQueen. No, not the famous one. He's an unsuccessful actor, actually, who embodies and condenses human disappointment and resentment. But it could have been better. It could have been more sour. He has a hopeless agent, a daughter he barely knows and who isn't really thrilled at the prospect of doing so, and an extremely satisfied now ex-wife. He understudies, if that wasn't enough, he understudies for the 12th sexiest man alive and falls for his funny, neglected wife. It's not an original story, but then again, not many of Nicholls' plots can be said to be truly original. Once again, though, as it happened with Starter for 10, the humiliation and the pain it generates are so immense. There's no payback time. The ending is so abrupt and sudden, the book somehow feels incomplete. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm really sad I have to say this, but The Understudy to me is the worst of the lot. This one was such a disappointment. It's called Snowdrops, it's a debut. Came out this year in 2011, and I bought it because of a billboard in the tube. Anyway, it's the story of one Nick Platt, who's an English lawyer. He's living in Moscow during the wild Russian oil boom. Or at least, this is the story he intends to tell. Because it's clear from the word jump that he's writing to confess something to his bride-to-be. Wariness of marriage on my part aside, what is truly disturbing about this detail is that to me, it all felt like he was kicked and bullied into the truth. He's not really enjoying lifting a weight off his shoulders. Anyway, Nick actually meets two girls, is romantically involved with one of them, although a very physical type of love. This leads, quite skillfully I might add, to a number of details of his past he really shouldn't be anxious to depict to his significant other, and yet he does, at length, visually. The actual sin he tries to confess, the whole point of the story, is so mixed up with a bunch of other not so serious, it meant nothing to me, I love you, it was before I met you ones, that it's cringeworthy. It made me wonder what the sin actually was in the end. So tall is the pile of excuses he has built along the way. I think the author must have doubted his course too, because the last sentence is the blow to the head of what, to me, is an agonizing story. Some sentences just don't make sense. Nick's thoughts don't make sense. And since probably the main point of the story is a con, the way the con itself is unveiled is not believable at all. I'm not gonna lie, some sentences seem to tap into a deeper kind of truth. But then again, you find this short description of someone. It goes, he was a short, pale man with thick hair, thick Soviet glasses and worried eyes. I mean, if you use thick, you might as well use it 3 times. But if you just use it twice, you make me wonder if your thesaurus was, I don't know, out for lunch. Like, look at this. I so dislike this book. Look, I folded all the pages. There's even one bit. I was reading it on a plane, and I was near the end, and my patience was running so thin that my reaction to a particular sentence, just bear with me, was just this. Anyway, the one that I'm gonna give to you as a gift is Nick is talking about his disposition towards children, or babies rather. And he says, I'd looked at babies with their crawling and grabbing, their purposeful yet random tortoise movements, with no feelings at all. And then he goes and says, don't worry, it's different now. I know you want children, it's settled. Are you kidding me? Oh, and then this other bit. He's in bed with the girl he's fallen for, not the bride-to-be, the one from the past. And this is what he thinks. I saw Marcia asleep, blah, blah, blah. The fine blonde hairs on the knot of his spine glowed in the moonlight from the window, like a love letter written on her body in invisible ink. Dot. I needed to piss. Really? Is it clear how much I didn't like this book? Sorry, but really, I didn't. Oh, this one I actually liked. Oh, that's a nice twist. It's called That Matter. Again, came out this year. It's the author's first novel for adults. And it's a ghost story. It's set in the Arctic in the 30s. Jack Miller is a working-class young man. He has an education, though. He has had to leave it aside for economical concerns. He seizes the opportunity to be the radio operator on a scientific expedition to the fictional outpost of Gruhuken in northern Norway. He records in his journal the growing cabin fever, and the story unravels and reveals a horrific past of the land. Apparently the land is still grieving for it. The setting of this book is crucial to its effect. It's not particularly carved language-wise. It doesn't have a striking style or anything, but the story itself is the main core. And this is something that I really, really liked, because it's not fussing about. It has a story to tell, and it just does. If Snowdrops was a fraud, not just the story of a fraud, but a fraud, this one is an honest book. Should I call this a book? This is a good start for this comment of mine over the interrogative mode, and came out in 2009. It's a different reading experience, because this book is curious. It starts with a question that leads, or maybe doesn't, to another, and so on, and so on. It just forces answers out of you. It's a work of charm and bravery. And it's magical, because as these questions pile up, a kind of melancholy arises. Deeply moving if you stop and think about it. To think that this book, even more than a regular book might be, will be very different, one reader from the next. The language is clever, the memory is generous in conserving details, and it embeds them in interrogations against the forces of time, erasure, and oblivion. And thank God, apparently questions are endless. These two were advised to me 1,000 times. It's Library of the Dead and the Book of Souls by Glenn Cooper. Library of the Dead was his first novel. It's a saga about predestination and fate. Most of all, it's about suspense. And to me, Glenn Cooper is a great writer when it comes to this, when it comes to a thriller. Actually, I find him much more entertaining than Dan Brown can be. The story is well told, the characters are interesting, and the bit that I like the most about the story is that when you actually get to the mystery and you unveil it, it's truly shocking. So it stands up to the whole suspense it's built along the book. It does provoke huge philosophical issues, and they're not completely overlooked or neglected, although they're not discussed at length either. But it does make sense, because this, I'm not saying it's an easy reading, but it's supposed to be entertaining. There is just one huge flaw. I mean, to me, it's a huge flaw. I don't know if it's the edition that I have, but there are so many stupid mistakes, so many typos and missed out words. It just made my fingers tingle. Again, it's a good read, but if you're pedant as I am, you're gonna want to read this with a blue pencil in your hand. As far as Book of Souls goes, though, I didn't find it as gripping as the first. Probably my expectations were too high, because again, I enjoyed a lot reading Library of the Dead. and I jumped into Book of Souls right away. The historical parts are clever and interesting, especially the Nostradamus bit. Maybe a bit long and a bit dragged out, and all in all, the effort that the author goes through to finally deal with the bad guys from the first book in the second one seem slightly forced into the plot, if that makes any sense. I'm sorry I read this next book now, because this is The City of Dreaming books. It was released in 2007, but it was written in 2004, and it's the fourth novel of the Zamoya series. I haven't read the previous ones, and now I wonder if that was a disadvantage on my part, because I don't think I've lived this book properly. This is a fantastic fantasy world. It's a world where books are the air, the water, the earth, and the currency. Books, reading and writing is everything there is, and all you need to know. Our main character is called Optimus and is a dinosaur. He has inherited his authorial grandfather's possessions, including a perfect story, written by an unknown author. As an aspiring author himself, he travels to Bookholm, the city of dreaming books, in search of this unknown poet. Bookholm is beautiful, but it's in its catacombs that lie the real treasured knowledge among dangers of unimaginable sort. It's a quest for answers, it's a picaresque. It's a world very different from our own, but with bits in common that feel and echo like quotations. The wealth of made-up words is, in my point of view, the most priceless gift this book has given me. But there are areas of it that somehow felt so annoyingly self-indulgent and self-satisfied. Somehow, to me, it crossed over too smug. Like you're not actually enjoying reading and writing anymore, you're just enjoying telling others that you enjoy reading and writing, and this is something that I really can't stand, and I guess that's what poisoned this book for me. These are the notes for all the next books that I want to talk to you about, but that unfortunately I don't have with me, because I left them in Italy. I couldn't really carry them with me. I have my notes anyway, and I'll try to fidget with them as I talk. Now the next one is called The Cat's Table, and this one wasn't a suggestion. I picked it up on my own because of the cover. I'll put the picture somewhere. Came out this year from the same author of The English Patient. It's a novel set in a constricted space, and this is something that I normally enjoy a lot. The Cat's Table is opposite to the Captain's Table as the least desirable dining assignment aboard a cruise ship. What is really special about this book is the assortment of characters, and the story thickens as it progresses in a way that actually reminded me the gradual disappearing of the shore in the distance as a ship sails away. It becomes so complex, again, gradually, that at the shore you don't really recall where you started to begin with. If I had to summarize it all, it's a journey to the adulthood of three 11-year-olds. And now more than ever, this book is a journey. So I suggest that when you're done reading it, and I really suggest that you do, you wait for the ship to dock. You walk a few steps and then you look back and try to figure out what actually happened. This is a fast read, but it lingers with you for a long time. Exactly like a journey that you can go on, and maybe you understand it fully only when you come back home. The next one is an absurd read for me, really, but I took one of my grandmother's suggestions, and I swear I'll never do this again, by Nancy Mitford, and it's a saga of recurring characters. The first was The Pursuit of Love, and the second was Love in Cold Climate. Nancy Mitford was from a declining aristocratic family, ended up becoming a quite successful writer, all in all. Her works are not masterpieces of highbrow literature, but they're enjoyable, they're humorous, and they're fun to read. The reason why I'm not going to repeat the experience again is that they deal with a matter that really is not my cup of tea. This one is the story of a culture shock and an attempted divorce. Bear in mind, it's light-hearted, it's fun, and almost all the story takes place among upper-class people who haven't got the slightest serious trouble or worry in the world. There are a few glimpses upon some slightly more serious matters, but what makes it worth reading, to me, is just this. The amazingly lacy language it's written in. I mean, it's subject to personal taste, but no matter what your opinion is, this is the result of a great skill. Then it's Sarah Winman, When God Was a Rabbit. Again, it's a debut, and again, it came out this year. It's a novel about love, life, but the good bits of it. The bad bits to me are a bit in the shadows, and it's also about how important families are. It follows the life of one Ellie for 4 decades. The power of this book, to me, resides in the fact that it's narrated by Ellie herself, whose voice, mind, and ability to observe the world change along the years. Important friendship, and then there's the relationship with the brother. Now, the relationship with the brother, his name is Joe, at some point is shaken, and let's say she has to build it up all again. I'm walking on eggshells because it's full of spoilers. Somehow Ellie works around problems, reclaims and rebuilds all these important relationships to her. And all of this works perfectly fine because there's hope, there's forward thinking, there are prospects. But some areas of the book just don't do the same. At least they don't to me, as usual. At some point, some mystical powers are involved, and that was really unrequired. Somehow they make the story too fanciful. There's the theme of 9/11, and it appears, again, fake and completely unnecessary. What is good about this book is that it's warm. It can be funny, innocent, and whimsical. You shouldn't expect much from it because it has its flaws, but it's a good read, and again, it's a debut. This face is it's my envy. And then there are 2 books, and they're both a challenge for different reasons. One is Afternoon of a Writer. It came out in 1987. It's a book about the mental mechanics of the writing process. A mechanism that, more often than not, is beyond the writer's control, with its own rather unpredictable momentum and logic. It's about the suffering that authors and writers go through. It's about communication, alcohol and substance abuse, creative process, fame, and romanticism. What makes this book a challenge is that the prose it's written in has a deceptive quality. It looks simple, but it can be hard to follow. Somehow this book feels distant. There's some sort of awareness of the reader that implies a desire to communicate, but it's sheer. There's impermeability, which makes it indifferent to evaluation. It's a book that talks to you whether you're listening or not. It's like a demonstrative experiment. It's fulfilled in some way by the mere fact that it exists and not by any reaction it may elicit. Then it's The Pale King. Probably everyone knows about the long process that brought this book into existence, but nevertheless, it's an unfinished novel. It was published posthumously. David Foster Wallace died in 2008, and this came out on the 15th of April 2011. It was compiled by friend and editor Michael Peach. I wonder if his surname is pronounced like this. Anyway, it's 50 isolated chapters. He had been researching for it since 1997, and in 2000, he referred to it as the long thing. In 2007, he had estimated it was 1/3 finished. It's about loneliness and depression, deeper kind of pain that humans sometimes have and do anything to distract themselves from. It's also about the boredom and how crushing it can be. But somehow I found it suggests that something may lay beyond this boredom. Bizarrely enough, I found it extremely more optimist than other works of his. It's also about the irrelevant complexity in which bureaucracy has plunged our lives, and how many ideas and stimuli are around our brains every day for the whole day. But then again, it talks about the idea of learning how to tell what to discard and what to keep in mind as proper experience in order to really glimpse the meaning underneath it all. And to me, this was the real surprise of this book, because he implies there's a meaning underneath it. I think it's one of those books that you need to read at least 2 or 3 times, and I haven't yet, but I'm definitely going to, because it's like if you're swimming on the surface and you see something glimmering at the bottom of the ocean. Maybe you don't have enough air in your lungs yet, but you're going to. So this is what I feel towards the Pale King. One day, I'll gulp enough air in. I'm gonna dive again and find what's glimmering on the bottom. Oh, just 2 to go. I'm amazed. Okay, next is Get Lost. Came out in 2010, and it's an adorable, lovely guide to getting lost. The point is, he who goes astray sees more of the world. It's a book that's supposed to teach you how to cave in to curiosity and to the need of finding out by yourself. I'd be dead without IMAPs by now, so this book to me was a very important learning stone. I'm not there yet. I hope I will be one day. The last one, I'm so sorry I don't have the book with me, because it's a precious gift. It's The House of the Morrigan. It came out in 1985, and it was given again to me as a gift. It's an old hand-me-down, really. A grandmother has written on it for Neil, 1988, and apparently Neil didn't really like it, so it came to me. The plot is rather simple. A 10-year-old Pidge buys a book entitled A Book of Patrick's Writing, and discovers that the book is actually a prison for the evil serpent Olglas. As usual, be patient with my pronunciations. The Morrigan wants the book so that she can absorb the evil of the serpent and take over the world. As usual, this is what evil ones want to do. There was a sequel, apparently, which was never finished. This is probably the most Irish book I've ever read. And it's bizarre because as I was reading it, I actually stepped on Irish land for the first time in my life. It's a story about magical stones and deities, talking animals, druids, and an epic battle, and I'll leave it at that. But what really struck me is that this book is so deeply set in the sceneries where his story happens that it couldn't be anywhere else. And the descriptions that it does, it really doesn't linger on them too much, but you perceive the scenery around the words, around the actions of the characters. It made possible for me to look at Ireland and say, oh, obviously, it couldn't have been any different. It's not that it spoiled the surprise to me. It was like meeting someone when you've had only good things about him or her. If you like fantasy literature, now bear in mind this is no Lord of the Rings, it's a much more joyful rendition of the same world. Well, not the same, but you catch my drift. I think it would make a great read for younger dreamers, and it will take you back to the dreamlike way you would look at unknown sceneries as a child, and remind you of how it was to look at things without knowing what they're called yet. I can't believe I made it. I'll stop for a second and pat myself on the shoulder. Okay, so that's it. As usual, I hope this was somehow interesting and or entertaining. Let me know if you've read. I look like a TV reporter. Let me know if you've read or you're going to read any of the books I talked about, and I think that's it. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.